time now to start with your thoughts on the big stories making rounds this morning. And we'll be starting with this one. Ghanaian government, I believe, has approved visa-free entry for all African countries' nationals. This is huge for those who love to travel. And Omwaking Scott is the first user who says, this is the way to go in Africa. Let there be a kind of Schengen visa program for African Union.
We need to take a pause, take a moment, and just ask why travel inside Africa, within Africa, is so problematic, is so stressful, is so expensive. And it's the irony, Bukola.
Why, you know, businessmen and women would prefer to import from China, you know, than to buy other stuff from within Africa. You know, it begs the question. It's unsettling, to say the least.
So that's been escalated now to business. They might say they get it cheaper from China on the one hand because they've been able to, you know, get that economies of scale. Now they produce at a cheaper rate. That's on the one hand. But for people who just want to go next door, you find out that it's even more expensive traveling within Africa than traveling outside of Africa.
Sometimes.
And it doesn't make sense as much because when you go outside Africa, people say, oh, you're from Africa. Right, and we always say no because we see Africa as a country, right? But it doesn't feel that way. It looks like you're traveling from continent to continent within Africa. So I think this is a way to go. Very, very commendable. I am looking at other countries now within the African region. I know some in West African sub-region have said, well, we're also opening our doors. Incidentally, those nations are under military rule. But let's go on to the next comment on this. This user says the best thing to do, very commendable. It's ludicrous that Africans have to pass through unnecessary processes to travel to other African countries. EU is an example, perfect example. You can drive through EU countries, just take a road trip and you're going across 5, 6 countries without stress.
Yeah, and you know, it's noteworthy to also say that the president, through his diplomatic missions, you know, has helped to eliminate some of the restrictions in securing South African visas as well. South Africa is also another country that is almost impossible to get their visa if you want to travel, even for the most, you know, insignificant of reasons. When I say insignificant now is for want of lack of better description. When you're not staying in that country for long, they still deny you visas. So we hope that the work that the president has begun will eliminate all of those needless restrictions, you know, to foster increased bilateral relations on many levels with our own kith and kin here on the continent in Africa. But what else are you saying this morning? Senior Man says, at least this will encourage tourists from her African brothers and sisters. You should have done this before Christmas, not after. I hope I jumped to the last, right?
Yeah, that's Baba Ade, who says that, oh yes, this one encourages tourism. But this user, Baba Ade, says, normally any country that does not open its doors for Africans should have same throwback at them. That's the reciprocity principle. Says, but trust me, most Africans will abuse that privilege and then boom, they have stricter access. See EU, for example. I understand that you're trying to somehow caution, encourage people to be cautious and all of that, but I think this is a point we should just talk about opening the doors. Yes, put some measures in place, but let's change the narrative. You can't keep doing the same things and expect a different result. That is what they call madness.
And so let's also hope that the AFTA, African Free Trade Area Continental Agreement, will also kick into effective implementation such that we'll see greater ease within other African countries on the continent, not just Ghana and South Africa. Yeah, so let's move on to other stories now. The one that is very worrying right now, which we'll be talking about on the program today in Sokoto State. We told you earlier about that airstrike that killed 10 people, whom the military has described as Lakrawa bandits. Governor Aliyu has visited those communities and has donated 20 million naira to the victims' families. So the first user this morning on this one is Veritas View, who says, I wonder what kind of training our Air Force officers in Nigeria receive that makes it challenging for them to execute precise airstrike operations on intended targets. Instead, they end up hitting civilian communities, leading to unnecessary casualty. This isn't the first time such an incident has occurred, and it raises serious concerns about operational accuracy and intelligence.
It's important to state right now that a lot of the comments coming out first are hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away from the theater of war itself. It's important, and I think it's great that authorities have said this will be investigated. If the military is saying we did this with precision, and you have some other people saying, well, no, you didn't, who then do we believe? And that's where the investigation, a thorough investigation comes in. But it's important to state that a lot of people do not really have an understanding of the war going on. So we understand that a lot of people will speak from their own knowledge, sometimes from their own biases, but let's allow the experts to do their job and have some trust in them. But this is something we're going to get into. The next user is Mohammed Abdul Karim, says that when this costly mistake, or when will this costly mistake stop in our alien country? I imagine that's what you want to say.
Yeah.
But as we said earlier on, this is an ongoing issue. It's the military's word against some of the community leaders and the state government's word. So we'll dive into this one to ensure that everybody gets some more informed perspective, because issues of security, particularly fighting these kinds of terrorist and bandits, is always very, very delicate.
Very delicate. But I imagine, Kadi, that there are leaders of the communities in question, 2 villages in Silama local government area. They can identify these people. They can provide information, about who they are, where they're from, what they were doing in the community at the time. Let's have their identities and, check out with what the military is saying, so that we can know whether indeed they are Lakrawa, members of the Lakrawa sect, or they're members of the community, that local government area. And
it sounds straightforward, Bukola, but we've had cases where community leaders, community members provide intelligence, and what do they get in return? They get reprisals. Some of those terrorists come back and attack them. And there's this popular saying, terrorists to some people, is freedom fighter to another people, or another group of people. So again, some of the injury cases,
a thin line.
Very thin line, but not to worry. We'll get you all of the insights you need on that one. But let's take a moment and move to just one final issue. Federal government committing 122 billion naira to promote CNG for transportation. CNG has now become gold, Bukola. Both conversion and even
getting the product
itself. I'm talking 1 year, 2 years ago, CNG, people were being begged to convert to CNG, but now it's even out of reach for the average person, talking about 1 million plus. This first user, Pakwando Avutu, says the same government aren't using or converting their vehicles to CNG. Okay, green energy is the future we intend to preserve, but let promoters practice what they preach. We've had some of them say, well, we've converted. Some advisors saying I have converted. Some agencies also trying to convert as well, but clearly not as widespread as you'd expect it to be.
Has the presidency converted? Have the ministries converted to CNG? We should ask those questions. Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Trade, Industry, Investment, Ministry of Agriculture, do they have all their vehicles converted from petrol use to CNG? So let's have those answers.
Practice what you preach.
Bakpando, thank you so much for that comment.
It'll be good to see the president riding a CNG-powered vehicle, right? Like, I'm doing it, guys.
And let's also have, the cost implication of their conversion. By that I mean, how it has helped reduce, the cost of powering those vehicles, their maintenance, as against what it was during
and by extension cost of governance, right?
Yes, and exactly, cost of governance.
Brilliant.
So all those are very important. Let's go on to Dr. Pina, who says, while the 122 billion naira commitment to CNG is a step forward, the real test will be ensuring its accessibility and affordability to the masses. We need clear plans on how this will directly impact fuel prices, reduce transportation costs, and tackle the challenges in the energy sector. So questions should also be asked about, the direction of the investment of this 122 billion naira. How many more CNG conversion centers is the federal government planning across the country? As it is now, we have just about 5, one in Lagos, one in Kwara, one in Abuja, I think one in Edo State or so. I don't know where the other is. And that's why you have a scarcity of CNG CNG in the country. When you go to some CNG centers, there's a long line of vehicles, waiting to convert or waiting to purchase the products. In fact, there is an abundance of petrol while there's a scarcity of CNG itself.
I know that there's a lot of training going on. They're trying to scale up, but clearly nothing close to the demand. You see trucks, a lot of these logistics companies now, Dangote, the rest, their trucks run on CNG now.
Oh, as a matter
so they're
of fact,
even competing.
They're on the expressway, the CNG center, just on Lagos expressway here.
In Abuja as well. On your way from the airport, you see that long line. And you're wondering, obviously cars don't stand a chance because you have about 20 trucks already, and you know the kind of quantity of CNG they will need.
And it will be a good time to also remind the presidential initiative on CNG about its plan to provide CNG kits, and I think, what do they call them now? Rickshaws, yes.
For the tricycles.
The tricycles, to youths in Kwara State. We haven't seen that materialize. Maybe it's in the works, but it was a promise made in partnership with the Ministry of Youth.
So let 2025 be the year you promise and fulfill the promise with speed. But that's the much we can take, at least for now. We'll take a moment, and we're starting off with that very thorny and delicate issue, the Sokoto airstrikes. What exactly went down? We'll bring you those information and the politics playing out in our ivory towers. It's quite interesting, really.
Yes, that's where we'll be headed.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So stay with us right here.
We'll be right back.